Hello everyone, welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. Story 1. Essex Police Emergency. Hi there, I'm okay. Hello, I might need police and a forensic team to my address, please. What do you mean, what's happened? My friend and I got into an altercation and I am the only one who came out alive. Are you telling me you've killed somebody? Yes, I am. On February 17th, 2014. 18-year-old Louis Daines made a chillingly calm call to the police informing them that he'd just taken a life. The web of lies created by this pathological child predator led to the death of an innocent child. The victim's name was Breck Bednar and he was just 14 years old at the time. Prior to this incident, Breck's mother, Lauren Lefebvre, had voiced concerns to the police about her child potentially being groomed. These complaints fell on deaf ears, with the police failing to take any steps to save Breck's life. Today we'll unpack the savage violence. Louis Daines, a predator with a track record of sexual assault and violence and a twisted desire for young boys, that he focused on Breck. First, we need to start by taking a look at the victim whose innocence nobody can deny. Lauren and her husband, Barry Bednar, were both born in America. They met in the town of Greenwich, Colorado, a town they loved so much that they named their first son after it. Breck was born on March 17, 1999, and by all accounts he was raised in a loving and caring environment. His parents had a great relationship and they extended that warmth towards their son by giving him everything he ever asked for. 2 years later, Lauren gave birth to triplets, making Breck an older sibling to 2 sisters and a brother. It appears that he was a good brother to them, showing a caring streak that continued until his very last day. However, it's fair to say that Breck's life was full of unexpected instability. His parents had moved to England 3 years before he was born due to Barry's job as an oil trader and shipping consultant. His father was a wealthy man, with some reports stating that he'd made a multi-million-dollar fortune in the oil trade. This meant that Breck went to the very best private schools for much of his life, but by the time he was in middle school, everything changed. Lauren and Barry divorced at some point, which put the family into sudden severe financial distress. Breck couldn't go to the high-end private school anymore and was forced to go to a nearby public school instead. Needless to say, this was a tough transition for the child. The private school had offered all sorts of perks, like a comprehensive sports program that helped keep him fit. With those programs now out of his reach, Breck retreated into a digital world. He filled his time by playing video games for hours on end, which made his mother concerned for his well-being. It is important to note that Barry seems oddly absent during the last few years of Breck's life. The shift to a public school suggests that Barry wasn't giving his ex-wife and children the same level of financial support anymore, which may have resulted in tension between the former lovers that their children inevitably noticed. Even so, Breck continued to enjoy a relatively stable life with his mother and siblings in the town of Caterham in Surrey, England. Today's video is sponsored by Aura, and it's a really important time to be talking about them because hackers may have stolen the social security numbers of every American. Over 2.9 billion records were stolen from National Public Data, which offers personal information to employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, and others doing background checks. These stolen records include a person's full name, address, date of birth, social security number, and phone number, along with alternate names and birth date. And members of the hacker group have reportedly released this information for free online. If you weren't taking precautions with your personal information online before, this should be a huge wake-up call. You've never been more vulnerable online than You are right now, but I'm not too worried about it because I use Aura. Aura alerts me if they find my phone number, email or social security number on the dark web. They're going to let me know fast if anyone tries to use this information to access my credit or bank accounts. They give me up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. They also provide a bunch of other features to keep you safe online, all inside one app. You can go to my link aura.com into the deep to try 14 days for free. That will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. I highly recommend you do this right now because not only is National Public Data not going to do anything to help you, they probably aren't even going to face any repercussions for this leak. I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/into-heap to try 2 weeks for free. Even though he didn't have the same level of privilege, he managed to settle down in a small town of about 20,000 people and developed an interest in technology based on reports from his family members. Breck had a natural aptitude for fixing things. As a child, he was often seen carrying around a toolkit, saying that he was mirroring his role model Bob the Builder. This blossomed into a genuine talent as he grew older. But Breck wasn't selfish about his skills. Whenever someone in his family faced a tech issue, Breck was always ready to step in and lend a helping hand, and if the family statements are anything to go by, he offered his support freely and tried teaching less tech-savvy relatives how to use their devices as well. But it turns out that there was a darker side to Breck's love of computers. As we previously stated, he'd started to disappear down a rabbit hole of online gaming. After switching schools, his mother did what she could to get him outside and keep him active, such as enrolling him in the air training squadron, where she hoped he'd learn the value of discipline and hard work. Unfortunately, Bree had already started walking down the path to destruction by this point, and it was through no fault of his own. His love of online gaming was a positive influence at first, allowing him to spend more time with his friends after coming home from school. It's possible that this was the only way he could stay connected with the friends he'd once known in private school. But regardless, the internet can be a wild and scary place, especially for a 14-year-old who doesn't know any better. It's full of dangerous people that would like nothing better than to exploit a child. This brings us to the other focus of the story, Louis Daines, the man that would eventually take Brex in a brutal attack. The first thing you might notice about Daines, who was 18 years old at the time of the incident, was that he looked much younger than he was. His baby face may have actually made him seem non-threatening, allowing him to get closer to his victims than a more mature-looking individual might have managed. Nevertheless, Daines turned out to be a cold-blooded predator. Although the story of his life might help us understand why he ended up like this, unlike Breck, Louis Daines never had much stability growing up. As an only child, he didn't have the kind of support you'd get from siblings. To make things worse, his parents got divorced when he was very young, and he was shuffled from home to home. Over the next few years, he lived with his mother and her new husband at first, but that arrangement didn't last long. His stepfather got a job overseas, and it appears that his mother didn't want to bring a reminder of her failed marriage along for the ride. Daines then moved in with his father, only to be kicked out of that home as well. The reasons behind this are unclear, but we do know that DNE eventually started living with his grandparents. The constant struggle to find a home, not to mention the feeling that no one really wanted him, absolutely wrecked DNE's mental state. He developed a habit of lying about the tiniest of things, often to impress people and make them his friends. Daines also had a knack for computers, much like his eventual victim, but this was a fact that he played up to extraordinary amounts. In his conversations, he made unbelievable claims about his skills, which would factor into his ability to gain Breck's confidence down the line in the years leading up to their fateful online encounter. D&E showed time and time again that he wasn't just poorly adjusted, he was straight up dangerous as well. He had a tendency to harass other boys, show extremely inappropriate sexual behavior, and refused to take no for an answer. This culminated in a 2011 incident in which Danes allegedly sexually assaulted a 15-year-old boy. There was evidence of the crime and the victim was willing to step forward, but Danes managed to escape justice simply because local police refused to file charges. This would be a recurring pattern in D&E's criminal activities. Every time he'd do something unspeakable, the police just wouldn't step in for some reason. Could his baby face have had something to do with it? There's a chance that the police looked at D&E's and saw an innocent child that didn't know any better, but as we'll soon reveal, these childish looks hid a homicidal rage beneath the surface. One thing that investigators eventually learned about the culprit was that he had enormous insatiable sexual appetites. We've already established his perverted preferences, but it bears mentioning that he couldn't get enough of them. Apart from the one assault victim that we already know of, Danes allegedly had a collection of horrific illegal videos that depicted minors. In his desperation to satisfy his urges, Danes also made a habit of preying on boys much younger than him. By 2013, the culprit had moved out of the home of his grandparents and started living alone in a flat in a town called Grace, situated in the county of Essex. This town was about 30 miles away from Curram, where Breck lived. In early 2013, a chance encounter set a year-long sequence of events into motion. These events would conclude with a bloody crime scene and the death of a boy that had no chance against a ruthless predator like Danes. Around the start of 2013, two of Breck's friends told him about a gaming group where they played Call of Duty and Battlefield. They may have also told him about the bold ring leader of the group, who seemed to have an almost supernatural level of influence over the other members. It must be said that all of the members of the group were around 13 or 14 years old, except that ringleader, who turned out to be none other than Danes. It's said that the culprit had a lot of influence over the gaming group members. He established this influence by making those claims we mentioned previously, which we shall now get into. It was clear that Danes had some degree of knowledge about computers, but the story he told his young impressionable gaming friends was completely out of this world. For starters, he claimed that he was a millionaire computer engineer living in New York, and that he earned his fortune by selling software to the U.S. government. If his lies were to be believed, even the U.S. Secret Service used programs created by this teenager from Essex. Since the recipients of these lies were so much younger than him, they readily accepted his tales and thought very highly of the ringleader. The fact that he was excellent at playing video games also boosted his reputation, and Breck was swept up in his lies as well. He was especially impressed when Danes claimed to have made $2 million off of Bitcoin, with the culprit further saying that he donated all the profits to Syrian refugees. It's clear that his goal was to establish himself as a great man, someone that these children should admire, and if the end result tells us one thing, it's that he did all this to satisfy some twisted urges that we may never fully understand. Bree started to spend most of his days playing video games with the group. During this time, they would use a program called TalkSpeak to chat and socialize. Dan took a special interest in Breck, likely because he saw an easy target in the team. Since Bree also had an interest in technology, Danes made himself seem even more trustworthy by giving him coding advice and telling him that he could set him up with a high-paying job if he listened to him. There's reason to believe that Danes was extremely controlling of the group. Anything he said was the final word, and there's a chance that the other members of the group were too scared to refuse him. Even so, they started to notice just how much influence Danes was starting to have over Breck, particularly noticing The way he tried to isolate the teen from his family. Lauren started to notice some concerning patterns as well. Breck had always been a model child. He went to church every Sunday, got good grades in school, and never talked back to his mother. Her new partner Simon Goodwin only had good things to say about Breck, indicating that he was polite enough to respect his mother's new lover as well, despite the mixed feelings he might have had about the arrangement. But after Breck joined the gaming group, all of that started to change. He didn't want to go to church anymore. He'd become argumentative and irritable. It was almost like he was turning into a completely new person, which made his mother understandably upset. She tried to restrict how much time he spent gaming, but there was no use. Breck always found a way to return to the group, to return to Deanie's, and the culprit's influence continued to grow. Things escalated one day when Lauren overheard Breck talking to Danes through TalkSpeak. She could tell that the person on the other end was a grown man, and realized that her child might be getting groomed. When she asked Breck who this man was, the teen told her that he was a rich programmer living in New York, but she was suspicious because he always seemed to play games with the group at normal UK hours. Her suspicion grew when she found out that Danes was supposedly just 17 and that he refused to show the group his case because he had secret undercover work that forced him to protect his identity. The truly heartbreaking part of the story is that she went to the police and reported that a potential child predator was talking to her boy on December 17, 2013. The police noted down the complaint but once again did nothing. 2 months later, Breck would leave his home in Crewe, never to be seen again. In early 2014, Danes told Breed to meet him. Of course, it wasn't possible for a teenager to travel to a different town, especially to meet someone older than him. The fact that Lauren knew about the threat Danes posed made it all the more difficult for the predator to get what he wanted to solve this. DNE sent Breck a mobile phone and gave him a cover story to tell his parents on his groomer's instructions. Breck was to tell his mother that he wanted to go and stay with his dad over the weekend. In reality, Breck was going to take a cab, which had already been paid for by Deanie's, and head over to the culprit's flat in Grace on February 17. Breck left his home in the cab a few hours later. Barry called Lauren, telling her that their son never arrived. Lauren became concerned, but no matter how hard she tried, she wasn't able to get in touch with Breck. More time passed and the younger triplets made a gruesome discovery online. They started receiving messages from friends asking if Breck had become the victim of a homicide. There were photos circling on social media that showed Breck's lifeless corpse, and they'd apparently come from the gaming group led by Danes. The children were devastated when they saw the images, and it's no coincidence that they were released to the internet. The police eventually arrived and confirmed that Breck had in fact died in a brutal crime, and the fact that they knew was through no skill of their own. No, that information had come straight from the perpetrator himself. That morning, Danes made aid to emergency services, asking them to come over with a forensic team. He confessed to slaying Breck, though he claimed that he did it in self-defense. In his version of events, Breck had tried to attack him with a pocket knife, but he subsequently described stabbing him in the brainstem and slashing him across the throat. However, his story seemed to fall apart right there on the call. He informed the dispatcher that he'd taken a shower before making the report, suggesting that the whole thing was coldly calculated. When police arrived on the scene, they found a mountain of evidence that confirmed the truth. Danes had done something truly horrific, and his icy calmness during the call only further showed how cold-blooded he was. My friend came to stay the night with me yesterday, feeling very down, feeling suicidal, and I woke up this morning. He was in a mess. I tried to calm him down. I hugged him and said that I was there for him. He shrugged me off. Can you just bear with me a second? Don't tell me anymore, okay? You're telling me he's definitely dead? Yes, I'm telling you he's definitely dead, right? Okay, Lewis, I need you to just take me back through that again. So what happened last night? Okay, he came to stay with me because he was feeling down. What's his name? Brett K. Bednar. Okay, so he came to stay with you. I can explain this to the officers. I need to take these initial details. I know. He came to stay with me the night. I did my best to comfort him. I woke up this morning. He was in a mess. I tried again. Just slow down again, Lewis. I need to take these details. So did you have an argument with him last night? No, we were fine. You were fighting? No, we were fine. We were fine last night. We both went to sleep. I said that we were fine. Okay, but why did he come to stay with you? Because he was fed up with his home life, right? Because he was fed up with his home life. He's had a lot of problems. I've known him for a long time. He came to stay with me. I was in Thailand last week on holiday. He was in Spain on holiday, right? Okay, so you both went to bed, and then what's happened this morning? I woke up. He was just standing up. He was in a mess, hands on his face. I got up. I put my arms around him and I said it was okay. He just shrugged me off and said no. I can't remember exactly what he said. He was going on about how he didn't want to go home. He was fed up with his life and he didn't want to go, right? Okay, I have a penknife on the side of in my room adjacent to my bed. I have a chest of drawers. After shaving the TV and stuff on there, I had a penknife on there folded. He picked it up, opened it, and then lost control. I slowed down. Let me just take those details here. Penknife on the bedside table. Brett grabbed this. What, in order to harm himself? No, in order to harm me. He opened it and I lost control. To harm and opened it. He lost control. I, in self-defense, put my left arm up to block him from stabbing me effectively. We struggled. I got him to the ground. He got up. I got the knife. Can you not interrupt me with this part? Okay, go on. Okay, this is being recorded anyway, isn't it? Yep, I grabbed the knife and I stabbed him once in the back of the neck, I believe. Somewhere near the brainstem. He turned around, tried to carry it on, and I think I stumbled on my chest of drawers. I fell over. I got back up, backed away, and then I don't remember exactly what happened, but the fight ended with me cutting his throat. I believe I turned around and I splashed his throat. He fell face first on my bed. I tried to stop the bleeding. Yep, he fell onto the floor. Yep, I couldn't stop him. His throat was properly cut and he's still on the floor. Yes, he fell onto the bed face first. I was trying to compress the wound at that time, right? Okay, Lewis, are you still in the room where Breck is? No. Where are you? Look, don't interrupt me, just let me explain this. This is being recorded. I didn't know what to do. I felt like, right, is the house where you are is where you are, and where Bree is? Yeah, but you're in another room, are you? Yes, I felt like taking my own life. I don't remember what happened after that. All I know is I dropped the knife in my hallway. I stripped down and just sat in the shower, right? You've left the weapon in the hallway? Yes, and I've spent how long sitting in the shower? I don't know. Look, are the police on their way? I can hear someone. They are. I'm going to go and do my part. Please, thank you for your help, right? Just listen first. There was the fact that Breck had been tied up with duct tape. When police examined the body further, they saw signs that he'd been sexually assaulted. It seemed as though Bree had had a truly brutal night, and after committing such a heinous act, he'd taken steps to conceal as much evidence as possible. Part of this involved taking a shower to remove the massive amounts of blood, but beyond that, Danes had wiped all of his hard drives and submerged them in water, hoping that this would obscure his perverted sexual history. With so much evidence in his apartment, the police were able to charge Danes with the homicide of a child. He seemed in no hurry to defend himself, pleading guilty to the crime in court and getting sentenced to 25 to life in the process. Circling back to the self-confession, Danes frequently asked the operator not to interrupt him. He knew the call was being recorded. There's a good chance that he saw this as his chance to shine. He wanted the spotlight to tell his story, to be seen as someone vicious and unstoppable. A decade later, Breck's family is still trying to recover from the loss. Lauren ended up suing the police over their inaction, prompting Surrey police to change how they handle emergency calls. She also started the Breck Foundation to raise awareness around the dangers of grooming. All of this is done in Breck's name, in the name of an innocent life that was inexplicably snuffed out. Story 2. He was giving my 8-year-old too much attention. He wanted her to buy these really tall shoes that were women's shoes, and I told him no. What would you do if a complete stranger offered to buy your daughter dresses and take her for a McDonald's snack? It sounds tempting, but something just feels off. Most of us would probably trust our gut and say no, but sadly that wasn't the case for Cherish Periwinkle. Cherish, an innocent 8-year-old, was brutally essayed and left dead in the bushes just hours after her mother accepted this stranger's offer, and the man responsible, he had a dark past that led to one of the most tragic outcomes imaginable, and by the end of this video you'll understand why this case is one of the most heartbreaking and haunting we've ever covered. In fact, the judge had to take a break during the jury deliberations due to the graphic and disturbing nature of the evidence. It raises so many questions, especially considering the killer had been released from jail just 3 weeks before Cherish's murder. Why was he free to commit such a horrific crime? Let's dive in and find out. Cherish Lily Periwinkle was born on December 24, 2004, but her life was chaotic from the very start. Her parents, Rain and Billy, met at a bar, and Cherish was the result of a one-night stand. Neither of them had planned for Rain to get pregnant, but when she found out she was expecting, she decided she would keep her daughter. Now Renee's friends described her as erratic but excited during her pregnancy. She told everyone different stories about the father. Some thought Cherish's dad was a past boyfriend who abandoned Rain when he found out she was pregnant. Others believed Cherish was the result of a one-night fling with a man who vanished after Rain refused to get an abortion. The truth, however, was much more complicated. Renee didn't tell Billy about Cherish until she was 3 years old, and she only did so because she was suing him for child support. Billy was shocked but excited. He wanted to be part of his daughter's life, but Rain had other plans, and their relationship quickly turned into a bitter custody battle that lasted most of Cherish's life. Billy wanted to make up for lost time and be present for his daughter, but Rain did everything she could to block him. She even claimed in court that Billy had been absent for the first 3 years of Cherish's life and was only interested in her now because of financial benefits. Despite these accusations, Billy never gave up. To settle the dispute, the court brought in a custody evaluator, Robert H. Wood. He spent months observing both Rain and Billy with Cherish. His report showed issues on both sides. Billy hadn't bonded with Cherish due to the time they'd missed, but he had a stable job and reliable income. Rain, on the other hand, often neglected her children, especially when she was around boyfriends or other men, and she had emotional outbursts tied to her bipolar disorder. In the end, the court decided that Cherish should stay with Rain because they already had a bond and Cherish had siblings. Even though the evaluator recommended Billy could provide more stability, the court's decision left Cherish in her mother's care, a decision that would have devastating consequences. Now the whole crime began when Donald Smith noticed Rain in a store. He saw her telling her daughters that she couldn't buy them what they wanted at a Dollar General in Jacksonville, Florida, and recognized a chance to exploit her situation. Rain was an overwhelmed mother, making her an easy target for Smith's manipulation, and I'm not here to judge, but let's take a moment to consider Rain's perspective. For someone with financial stability, turning down a stranger's offer for $100 shopping spree might seem easy, but when you're struggling to make ends meet, it's incredibly tough to say no. Predators like Smith, understand this and exploit the vulnerability of parents who are overwhelmed and desperate, unfortunately. That's exactly what happened to Rain and her daughter Cherish. The Perwinkles got into Smith's white van and went to Walmart, where they spent 2 hours shopping. At around 10:30 p.m. Smith offered to buy them cheeseburgers at the store's McDonald's, and Cherish followed him. However, surveillance footage showed them leaving the store instead, marking the last time Cherish was seen alive. About 30 minutes later, Rain reported her daughter missing to the police, and an Amber Alert was issued 5 hours later. Tragically, the next morning, Cherish's body was discovered in a creek behind Highlands Baptist Church. Before we dive into the disturbing details, let's take a moment to understand the killer and why he raised red flags from the very beginning. Several psychologists who have evaluated Donald Smith over the years describe him as one of the most troubling child predators. He experienced serious brain damage and changes at a young age, partly from a head injury that affected the right side of his brain. His life was also shaped by a mix of sexual abuse, extreme drug use, and unhealthy relationships within his family. And when I say unhealthy relationships, I mean that his family didn't see him as a son, but in a troubling way. From the moment he was born, he was mistreated by his father, who fortunately died early on. However, this led to his mother becoming uncomfortably close with him, treating him more like a partner than a child. In one instance, after the death of one of Donald's stepfathers, he spent over $100,000 in just 1 week on various illegal substances. His mother, however, refused to acknowledge that her son had a substance abuse issue. It's important to note that Smith certainly understood right from wrong, but after multiple evaluations of his brain and neurological symptoms, professionals concluded that he lacked basic impulse control. But perhaps the most troubling signs came when Donald was just 10 years old. He began to expose himself publicly, going to parks, playgrounds, and places generally occupied by children, showing the most disturbing parts of his body to everyone he came across. Sadly, as he got older, he began to touch himself, taking delight in the terror and confusion he created. By the time he was 18, he was well known for this behavior, but it would be another 3 years before he was arrested for pleasuring himself in front of a child at a park. Donald Smith served 5 years in prison and was released in 1987. Before his release, many professionals warned that he should never be let back into society because he couldn't be rehabilitated. Joseph Wu described Smith's situation as a perfect storm of abuse and trauma, making him a constant threat, especially to young children. Smith knew his actions were wrong and harmful, but he enjoyed causing fear and pain. Despite these warnings, Smith was released shortly after. On September 1992, he tried to kidnap a 13-year-old girl named Carrie Ann Buck. Smith approached her in a van while she was walking to a friend's house. He tried to convince her to get in, but when she refused, he cursed at her and demanded she come with him. Carrie Ann ran to her friend's house with Smith chasing her in his car. No one answered the door, so she ran to a nearby school playground and hid in a tube slide, pressing her body against the plastic to stay hidden. Smith searched the playground, calling out for her, but he didn't find her. After what felt like forever to Carrie Ann, Smith finally left in his van. She waited a bit longer to make sure he was gone, then ran back to her friend's house, where they called the police. Later on, the 13-year-old girl saw Smith's van in her neighborhood and ran to tell her mom. The pair followed his car, writing down his license plate information to give to the police, but before they could, Carrie Ann said that Smith saw her, immediately recognized her, and looked as if he was about to harm her. This failed kidnapping attempt resulted in Donald being sent to prison again, this time for attempted kidnapping and 2 counts of possessing obscene material with the intent to sell, which included child sexual abuse images. He was sentenced to 6 years for the first charge and 5 years for the other 2 counts, and after being released in 2003 Smith was arrested again and released in 2007 at the age of 51. He moved back in with his mother, who refused to acknowledge that her son was a sexual predator. She insisted to everyone she knew that he wasn't at fault for any of the crimes he had committed and believed he had been framed by others. She introduced Donald to many people in her community who described him as a nice, funny man. Despite being a known sexual predator, he seemed more or less normal to them. Many women found him charming and charismatic, allowing him into their homes to work as a handyman. They were aware of his history as his mother told them about it, but they felt his openness about his crimes showed growth and good moral character. Unsurprisingly, Smith hadn't stopped preying on children. On January 11, 2013, a call came into Crime Stoppers about Smith. Someone had seen the white-haired man lurking around a Walmart, wandering aimlessly and taking special interest in women with children. His behavior was so peculiar that the caller felt the need to alert authorities and give them his description. Little did they know, just 10 days later the serial offender would go on to commit an unthinkable crime. On June 21, 2013, Rain, along with her two daughters, left the home she shared with her boyfriend to walk to Dollar General. They needed to buy groceries and supplies for Cherish, who was excitedly preparing for her trip to California the next day to visit her father. Rain only had $100 in her account, money her boyfriend had given her to get Cherish to the airport. She was determined to make that money stretch as far as possible. While shopping, Cherish spotted a dress covered in hearts and begged her mom for it, saying she really wanted to wear it for her trip. Rain searched for the price tag but couldn't find it. After asking an employee, she discovered the dress was too expensive. Heartbroken, Rain had to tell Cherish they couldn't buy it, which upset the little girl. What neither Rain nor Cherish knew was that Donald Smith had been watching them. He saw the interaction and began to come up with a plan. After putting the dress back and buying their other items, Rain and her daughters walked outside, where they were approached by Donald. He mentioned he heard Rain tell Cherish they couldn't get the dress and offered to help. At this point, most people struggled to side with the mother. Many wonder how she didn't foresee the danger, especially since she admitted that something felt off. She mentioned that it seemed too good to be true when Donald showed so much interest in her child, and there are multiple reports that he even went into the dressing room with her daughter. Can you believe that? What's even more shocking is that she didn't stop her child from following him when he promised to buy them McDonald's. It's hard not to question everything in this situation. Despite facing financial difficulties, a parent's instinct about their child being in danger is something that shouldn't be ignored. After 30 minutes without hearing from them, she finally called the police. And I'm Lauren Robinson. Hi, is that Walmart? I'm in Cherish. I think my daughter's been taken. What do you mean, taken by a stranger? I can't find her. And at 11:36 p.m. the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office issued the first bow for Cherish Periwinkle and Donald Smith's white van. Officers reviewed surveillance footage showing Cherish and Donald together inside Walmart and confirmed they left in his van. They identified Donald from the video. However, an Amber Alert wasn't issued until 4:08 a.m. the next morning. This emergency response system is designed to quickly inform the public about missing persons using media broadcasts and electronic signs. It's proven effective in locating endangered individuals, as it alerts everyone in the area to be on the lookout. Given that the police knew what Cherish and Donald were wearing, the vehicle he drove, and how long it had been since they left Walmart, issuing an Amber Alert right away could have brought in numerous tips and possibly saved Cherish's life. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. The media also wasn't informed about the missing child until an hour after the Amber Alert. It would be 3 hours later before a concerned citizen, having seen the news report, called in to report a suspicious vehicle matching the one on TV at Highlands Baptist Church on Rucker road. They mentioned seeing a white van but weren't sure if anything had happened because they knew a girl had just been abducted from Walmart. 20 minutes later, Donald's car was spotted on the highway and was pulled over. However, Cherish was nowhere to be found. Donald was soaking wet when he was arrested, and when asked where he had been all night, he claimed he had been smoking crack cocaine with prostitutes and that he sweats heavily when using drugs. Based on the tip received, the first responding officer focused the search around a Baptist church, specifically in the marsh behind it at 9:20 a.m. on June 22, 2013. Cherish Periwinkle's body was found. She spent the last terrifying hours of her life with Donald Smith. He restrained her, assaulted her, and ultimately took her life. The force he used caused severe injuries. Cherish did not pass away quickly or peacefully. It was a brutal and painful death. He gagged the poor child to the point that her gums and nostrils started bleeding and her eyeballs popped out, and she did not die right away, and he didn't stop until Cherish ultimately died. Afterwards, Smith moved her body through the woods, hid it underwater in debris, and tried to ensure it wouldn't be found. However, his plans did not succeed despite overwhelming evidence against him. Donald decided to put Cherish's family through the torment of a trial. He knew he would likely face a life sentence but craved the attention and a sense of control, so he pleaded not guilty. The nation was taken aback by the case and united in support of Cherish's family. Rain gave multiple interviews expressing her belief that Donald should have been kept off the streets and that the justice system had failed both her and her daughter. However, public opinion about Rain was mixed. Many questioned why she allowed a stranger to enter her 8-year-old's dressing room and why she went with him in the first place, while some felt she had simply been too trusting. Others couldn't ignore her erratic behavior during the interviews. In one interview, Rain went as far as to claim she was a psychic, asserting that she had predicted Cherish's death years earlier, saying, "I always knew Cherish would die when she was 8. However, less than a month after Cherish's tragic passing, her 2 youngest daughters were removed from Rain's care by the Department of Children and Families. While no specific reason was publicly given for the girls' removal, a spokesperson for the department stated that in such cases they aim to reunite parents and children when it is safe. After the removal of Cherish's younger sisters, Rain's past in Australia came to light, revealing that she had abandoned her first daughter before Cherish was born. This revelation horrified many. One family member expressed, "Her own daughter doesn't want anything to do with her. I've never wanted to have anything to do with her because of who she is. She's a bad mother." Rain's sister Carrie and her oldest daughter Lindsay both believe Rain is responsible for Cherish's death. Carrie stated, "It's terrible, but I think about it every day. I can't sleep. It feels like just yesterday." When asked who she blames for what happened to Cherish, Lindsay replied, "My mother 100%. That pedophile was going to get any child he could." Because of this, Cherish's mother faced significant public backlash, with many blaming her for the incident. She continued to make public appearances claiming she was working to regain custody of her younger daughters, but court records suggested otherwise. The girls remained in foster care for a year, with the courts giving Rain that time to devise a plan. She was instructed to secure a job and find suitable housing to regain custody of her daughters, but she never followed through. According to court records, after Cherish was murdered, Reese struggled to maintain stable employment, often facing rejection due to her circumstances and the stigma attached to what happened. Grieving the loss of her child, she found herself in a dark place. In a surprising turn of events, Ray's daughters were adopted by their aunt, and in Australia both girls have reportedly adjusted well and are living happy lives with her. Meanwhile, during the trial, Donald Smith's defense was weak. His lawyers attempted to argue that Rain was more responsible for what happened to her daughter, claiming she allowed Cherish to go off with him. However, like in the case of Joel Guy Jr. They were overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence against him. Unsurprisingly, after less than an hour, Smith was found guilty and sentenced to death, but this was just the beginning of the story. Smith's trial began on February 12, 2018, more than 4 years after Cherish Periwinkle's tragic death. But before concluding their case, the prosecution delivered a final blow by playing secretly taped conversations between Smith and another inmate. Donald Smith continued to speak freely in jail, revealing his intentions and plans. His behavior demonstrated a clear attraction to young girls and a propensity for violence. The jury quickly found him guilty on all counts after just 15 minutes of deliberation. The next decision was whether Smith would spend his life in prison or face the death penalty. During the trial, experts came forward to discuss Donald Smith's complicated background, highlighting issues with his brain and a troubling history of sexual abuse. They shared findings from imaging studies that showed significant shrinkage in his brain, hinting at possible neurological problems. These could include neurodegenerative conditions like CTE or frontotemporal dementia, as well as different types of epilepsy. Smith was diagnosed with orbitofrontal syndrome, a condition that often leads to behaviors like hypersexuality, poor impulse control, and repeated criminal actions. Despite these mental health challenges, experts argued strongly that Smith still had the ability to grasp the seriousness of his actions and the potential consequences they carried. The jury ultimately recommended the death penalty, and Judge Mallory Cooper imposed the sentence after his conviction. Recorded jailhouse conversations between Smith and his mother revealed another disturbing side of him. Smith seemed excited about the attention he was receiving and denied being a child molester. Despite overwhelming evidence, he suggested that as a registered sex offender he felt he had no choice but to kill Cherish when she followed him, a chilling admission that underscored his lack of remorse and the premeditated nature of his crime. "You have to go. I don't care how you got to go." Smith seems to be plotting a mental health defense, even going so far as to ask his mother for a copy of a manual on psychiatric disorders. It's shocking how manipulative he is, using his mother to try to gain favors and get out of jail. The truth is, if he were free, he would pose a serious threat to anyone. But at the heart of this case is the heartbreaking loss of a precious little girl. Cherish was a beacon of joy, always smiling, never showing any signs of unhappiness. If you ask anyone in Jacksonville, they'll tell you the same. It's unimaginable that an 8-year-old could be taken from us like this. We can only hope people remember her bright smile and the promising future she had ahead of her. She would have accomplished so much, but now we'll never know what could have been. As we've said many times on our channel, be careful with kindness from strangers. The world is a dangerous place, and you should always trust your gut feelings. Story 3. No, I'm not going to be a boy no more. I'm going to evolve into a man, and I'm going to handle my business, and we're going to have a great time. Alright, okay, well, first of all, you need to stop calling it your business, and you need to start calling it our business. Our business. I like that. I do like that. You got it. I got it. I like that, because if we do this, we're in this together. Alright, for the long haul. Got it. For the long haul. Yes, some people are kind because they want something in return. Others, like Catherine Gasp, are kind because their heart is too pure. This tragic victim of a deadly crime that took place in 2017 may just prove that good people actually exist in the world. Although her brutal end suggests that we should be careful of who we're kind to, Catherine's death was no accident. It was brought about by a man she loved and who she thought loved her back. This man is Charlie Maison, whose violent tendencies and dark lifestyle Catherine ignored because she thought she could help him get on the straight and narrow and fix him. Today we'll be unpacking this heartbreaking case of Catherine's homicide, which occurred just months after she met her killer and mere hours after she bailed him out of jail. Let's start by shining some light on the Victim of this senseless crime, Catherine was born on August 16, 1973 in Los Angeles, California. She was reported to be an exceptionally kind kid from a very young age, especially when it came to taking care of her brother Corey. However, her life wasn't exactly easy. Catherine's parents divorced when she was still fairly young, an event that would have traumatized most children. Catherine simply didn't allow this to bring her down, though she kept her head up high, made sure her brother got through the divorce okay, and even forged a loving, respectful relationship with her stepmother. Eventually, Catherine decided to leave the past behind her. While LA was a beautiful place to grow up, she wanted to put some distance between herself and the broken home she had to escape from. She headed for Arizona, where she went to college and eventually became a beloved kindergarten teacher. Her behavior with the children shows her deep, enduring empathy and her tendency to see the best in everybody. This may have even been the reason she couldn't see Maison for who he was. All evidence indicates that he was past the point of saving, and practically everything he'd done up until he met Catherine seems to confirm this. Unlike Catherine, Charlie Maison, who was born in Williams, Arizona in 1989, wasn't what you'd call a well-adjusted member of society. In fact, he had a history of violence, including brutal assaults on innocent people. There's a chance that he and Catherine eventually bonded over their experience living in broken homes when they met, since Malison also had to deal with his parents getting divorced. This is where his story diverges even further from Catherine's. Maison was the sort of person that always found himself on the wrong side of the law, and as it so happens, his stepfather turned out to be the chief of Williams Police, Henry Nixon. Henry was understandably frustrated by his stepson's refusal to follow the law. This tense relationship eventually led to Maison leaving home when he was just 17. What followed was a never-ending series of increasingly aggressive crimes. It is important to note that Maison had started abusing narcotic substances from a very young age. He had severe addictive tendencies, and when he managed to get the substances he craved, his behavior only got more violent. It's difficult to look into Maison's criminal history prior to when he had turned 18, since these offenses are often expunged when committed by minors. However, on the 29th of January 2008, shortly after he became a legal adult, Maison was arrested for theft. The fact that his first arrest came shortly after his 18th birthday is telling. It suggests that he wasn't the sort of person who could control his impulses. As it turns out, this was just the beginning of a long, escalating criminal career. He spent the next year in jail and tried staying under the radar for the following 3 years, but in April of 2012 he couldn't hold back his violent urges anymore. They exploded back into full view when he committed aggravated assault, that too against an officer of the law. He was convicted of the assault with an additional charge for resisting arrest thrown on top, and he was sentenced to 4 years in jail. On the 19th of June the following year, based on these timelines, Maison was released sometime around June 2017. His family members had distanced themselves from him, with the sole exception of his sister, and with a criminal record and serious behavioral issues, Maison didn't have many job prospects on the horizon. He eventually managed to get a job back home in Williams at the Wild West Junction waiting tables. It didn't pay very much, and Maison was struggling to make ends meet. Coupled with his substance abuse problems, the culprit was probably barely scraping by. That's when he had met someone that would change his life forever, someone whose life he would end in a brutal attack that left the entire state of Arizona in shock. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. By 2017, Catherine had become a well-respected member of the Phoenix community. She had a solid job at Arrowhead Elementary in Phoenix's North Glendale neighborhood where the children absolutely loved her. She had a knack for making them feel safe and special, with records showing that she treated them with empathy and kindness. She even adopted a dog from a local shelter who she named Sunshine, and she always made sure that it was well taken care of. However, Catherine didn't have much money to fall back on. There wasn't much of an inheritance waiting for her, and the salary of a kindergarten teacher only went so far. But since teachers are usually off for the summer, Catherine decided to get herself a second job to supplement her income. The Grand Canyon Railway in the nearby town of Williams happened to be hiring, so she applied and successfully got the role. It helped her get away from the hustle and bustle of Phoenix for a while, and there was a restaurant in town called the Wild West Junction that had great food at great prices. On July 10, 2017, Catherine went to the Wild West Junction for lunch. She noticed that one of the servers was walking with a limp, and being the sort of person that loves helping others, she wanted to make sure he was okay. The server turned out to be none other than Charlie Maison, the man who would take her life in just a few short months. Though Catherine didn't speak to Maison at that moment, she came back the next day to ask after him. He'd taken the day off, but the staff gave her the number of his sister, who he still had a close relationship with. Catherine gave Mon's sister a call and eventually connected with the intriguing young man. Mon was around 17 years younger than Catherine. He was a good-looking man by all accounts, and towered at 6 feet 6 inches and over a foot taller than the 6 feet 5 inches in Catherine. Based on what Mellon's acquaintances have said, he could also be very charming when he wanted to. There's a chance that Catherine was smitten by him. The way she acted with him over the course of the rest of the summer certainly seems to indicate it. When she found out that he'd only recently got out of jail, Catherine couldn't resist getting involved. She thought she could fix him. In her view, all he needed was a positive influence, someone that would help him tell right from wrong. Over the next 6 weeks, it seemed as though Catherine was actually succeeding in her goals. Catherine grew very attached to Mon pretty much as soon as she met him. As for Mellison, there's a chance that he even admired her or even loved her for wanting to help him, but it's more likely that he saw her as a meal ticket, as we'll soon reveal. He may have also seen her as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Catherine did everything she could to make Melison's life better. Despite having very little money herself, she rented him an apartment in Williams, helped him get a full-time job, and genuinely thought that she was making progress. 2 weeks after they met, Melson even proposed to Catherine, possibly even telling her that she was the love of his life. Though Catherine didn't accept the proposal, it's fair to say that she'd been swept off her feet. But this fragile piece was never meant to last. Deep down, Mon simply wasn't the sort of person that could be fixed. It's possible that he didn't want to be fixed in the first place, and about a month after he met Catherine, he ended up showing her his true colors. M's sister was the only family member that wanted anything to do with him. It's possible that she had fond memories of their childhood together, or she, like Catherine, felt like he could change for the better. On August 20th, 2017, Mon proved just how wrong she was. He accompanied his sister and her children to Tempe for a road trip in her Chrysler Town and Country. There's a chance that he'd been taking illegal substances, because at some point during the journey he started to get extremely paranoid and noticed a car next to them. And in his disoriented state of mind, he assumed that the driver meant him harm. This paranoid spiral went completely out of control when he started suspecting his sister of orchestrating a plot to assassinate him. In his own words, he felt like she was going to get him sniped, and that the car next to him was in on the plot. The culprit's survival instinct kicked in, and he immediately pulled out a black handgun. He was sitting in the front seat at the time, which he felt to be an uncomfortably vulnerable position in case anyone took a shot at him. In order to protect himself from this non-existent threat, Mon picked up one of his sister's children and planted them in the front seat while he climbed into the back seat. His sister started to panic, realizing that her brother wasn't in his right mind. She pulled the car to a halt and exited the vehicle with her children, prompting Maison to get into the driver's seat and speed off while her brother headed back to Williams. She immediately called the police and reported the car is stolen, and later called his sister and told her that the car was parked in front of the Canyon Club in Williams. He told her that the keys were inside and assumed that this would convince her not to press charges against him. His sister allegedly told him that she wasn't going to get the police involved, likely in an attempt to protect herself and her children from her clearly violent brother. However, the police were most definitely involved. Hours after this incident occurred, Malzahn exited the Canyon Club and was immediately confronted by officers. I already got a police report on it ready. Do you have anything else on you that we need to know about? Charlie, you can stand him up, get it up on his knees. I just talked to my sister. She said she didn't file the report. She said she didn't press no charges on me. He tried to pretend that nothing was wrong and that he hadn't done anything illegal, but his sister's report told police everything they needed to know. After they found a 9mm handgun in his possession, they arrested him and charged him with theft of a vehicle, unlawful possession of a firearm, and possession of a firearm while committing a felony. He was remanded into custody at Coconino County Jail and his bail was set at $20,000 with nowhere else to turn. Malzahn called the only person that cared about him, the only person he hadn't pushed away just yet. While Catherine was shocked to find out that Malzahn was in jail, many of the phone calls they exchanged seemed to express intense romance, but at the end of the day what Maison needed the most was money for his bail. Unfortunately, Catherine just didn't have the money on her at the time. A phone call recorded on September 9th shows how difficult things were getting between them. The only way Catherine would be able to get her hands on the funds would be through a bail bondsman. Local bail bondsman Tom Watson heard her out and strongly advised her against helping her boyfriend in trouble. There was no indication of any kind of threat to her. She told me what we were going to do. She said, I sent all your paperwork, you have part of your money, come in and we have an appointment at 4:00 and you're going to be there. Because I want you to bail Miles on, because I know you will help me keep track of him, and if you're not there I'm going to go to another bail bondsman. She had made her plans plotted out. You know how she was going to keep him in line and how she was going to rehab him. She goes, Tom, I thought about everything you told me and you asked me why I'm getting him out. And she says, I guess I really do just love him. This conversation took place on October 6th, by which point Mon had been in county jail for several weeks. Despite the advice of the bail bondsman, Catherine headed to the jail with the money to get her boyfriend out and finally set him straight. No, I'm not going to be a boy no more. I'm going to evolve into a man and I'm going to handle my business and we're going to have a great time. All right, okay, well, first of all you need to stop calling it your business and you need to start calling it our business. Our business, I like that, I do like that, I got it, I like that, because if we do this, we're in this together, alright, for the long haul, got it, for the long haul. Yes, Catherine had some conditions for releasing Melton. She wanted him to be more committed to her and to commit to becoming a better man. Melon agreed to all of her conditions and vowed to finally grow up. Oh no, you have one of those. Okay, what, talk to me, tell me. Okay, so there's 6 rules and some of them are repetitive for Tom's thing, because Tom is going to have you sign them. Okay, alright, are you ready? All right, so one of them is you're checking in every day with Tom. That's what he said, and I said okay, I'll put it on there. And then the Friday I just told you, checking on Friday was FaceTime, and Tuesday you just have to text. Okay. Oh, Tuesday, and I'm sorry, Tuesdays and Fridays is a photo or a receipt. Okay, you and and I are going to attend an AA or NMA meeting twice a month, so that's every other week, and it's just wherever we can find one, and they're all over the place. I mean, so we don't have to go to the same place every time. Okay, we're going to find you a counselor, and you're going to commit to twice a month talking to them. Okay, we can get your family issues out of the way. Okay, your paychecks are going to go directly into my bank account. Okay, and then your cash goes to me, but I will make sure I give you money for whatever you need. Alright, okay, that's all 6. I'm hoping there's one more. I'm hoping that you won't be shopping without me, because I want to do stuff with you. No, I won't be doing nothing without you, dear. You're probably going to need money for lunch while you're at work, or I don't know. Unless you make your lunch, you know, also be working out of their front. They could probably feed you. You just need a couple of dollars in my pocket. That's alright. You might not like what is it. Talk to me. You're going to have to do a drug test once a week. That's cool. I'm not worried about that. Alright, and you? No drugs, no alcohol, no gambling, and I'm taking away your internet porn, but we can buy you videos based on these conditions. It appears that Catherine really thought that Melzen was a safe person to be around. At the same time, she showed a complete disregard for his violent history. So many people told her not to go through with this, and if she'd listened to them, she might be alive today, but she was clearly caught under the spell of this handsome younger man. Emson seemed to genuinely agree to her terms. There was no indication of deception in his voice, because that's just how good of a liar he was. Security footage captured Catherine entering the building at 8:39 p.m. Charlie was released at 10:12, after which he drove off with Catherine. This would be the last time anyone saw her alive. On October 8, 2 days after Catherine bailed him out, Melzen was apprehended in Tucson while using her credit card. He initially lied about who he was, but eventually admitted his real identity. Back in Phoenix, Catherine's roommate started to grow worried because she hadn't heard from her friend in days. While this wasn't unusual, Catherine always made arrangements for Sunshine, her dog. She hadn't made any such arrangements this time around, which made her roommate think that things had gone terribly wrong and report her missing a few hours after he was caught using Catherine's credit card. Mon went on a sudden vicious crime spree at Arizona State University. He followed underage girls around on campus and even tried to enter one's dormitory when she refused to allow him access. He reportedly brutally punched her multiple times and threw her to the ground. He followed this up by stealing the car of another student named Shannon McRae, apparently threatening to bash her face in if she didn't give him the keys. That's a Class 6 felony. 1 count of assault. That's a Class 1 misdemeanor. I did appoint an attorney to represent you, and you're going to have a court date on this matter. It'll be a status conference on October 19th at 8:30, and at this time I find proof evident presumption great that you committed these 2 felonies while you were on release for another felony. It's the matter out of county, and therefore you are going to be held without bond on this matter. It's unknown what Mazone did with this car, because he was later caught on security camera driving Catherine's RAV4. Since he was also the last person to see Catherine alive, police marked him as a prime suspect. One of his acquaintances that saw him driving the car said that there had been a massive amount of blood in it. In light of this, police started to think Mazone was responsible for a homicide. At around 1:38 m on October 9th, Mon was spotted during a traffic stop. He was arrested and brought in for questioning and initially refused to tell them anything about what happened to Catherine. On October 13th, he finally broke and told them everything about the gruesome incident. After getting bailed out of jail, Melzen went to a friend's place in Clifton, 650 miles away, where he tried to buy illegal substances. When Catherine found out about this, an argument ensued which pushed Mazone over the edge. The culprit went completely insane as he stabbed Catherine 14 times all across her body with defensive wounds indicating she tried to defend herself. Melson then ran Catherine over with her own car, breaking several ribs. In the life following this, he dragged her body to a bridge near the tiny town of Mayer, Arizona, and where he tossed a few handfuls of dirt over her and left. Police eventually revealed that Catherine's body had been found and that Mellison was being charged with first-degree homicide. He was set to receive the death penalty, but after cutting a deal with the prosecution, he pleaded guilty in exchange for his maximum sentence being reduced. Last name: Rangy R.U. and I'm a sergeant with Flagstaff Police Department. Okay with that said, bring us up to speed if you could on where we are today. Well, we've been investigating the disappearance of Catherine Garispy for approximately 2 weeks now, and some of the latest developments in this case were some investigative work done by our detectives division, in which they conducted an interview with the suspect. In reference to this case, it has been reclassified as a homicide, but during that interview they learned some details, such as the location of a deceased person. They went and confirmed that there was a deceased person at that location who met the description of Catherine Garispy. At this time, we're pending DNA testing to verify with 100% certainty that it is in fact Catherine Garispy, but we're very certain that it will come out to be Catherine. Charlie Mason ultimately got sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The family and friends that Catherine left behind were devastated by the sudden tragic loss, especially since all Catherine had tried to do was help the violent culprit. In the end, while it was her empathy that put her in the line of fire, Melson was the one that chose to end her life in such a brutal way. Story 4: They weren't shot all at once. Members of the family saw other members of the family being killed. They say troubled minds often dwell in the youth, but nothing could prepare anyone for the twisted actions of these 6 young individuals. What started as a carjacking quickly turned into a horrifying massacre, leaving an entire family brutally murdered except for the youngest member, the sole survivor. This is the story of the Lawlett murders, a case so shocking it would forever be etched in history as one of the most brutal crimes the police have ever faced, and by the end of this video you'll understand exactly why this case remains unforgettable. Almost 28 years ago, in 1997, the Lawlett family became victims of a tragic murder over a seemingly small reason, all starting when the father shared his faith with a group of troubled teenagers. Now they were the kind of family you'd want as neighbors, hardworking, loving, and deeply rooted in their beliefs. The father, Var, was born in Bergen, Norway in May 1962. The youngest of 4 siblings, in his 20s he moved to Florida, where he met the vibrant Delphina, who hailed from New Jersey and was born in March 1969. The two tied the knot in February 1989 in sunny Miami, Florida, and soon welcomed their first child, a beautiful daughter named Tabitha. With a growing family, the Lawletts sought a peaceful sanctuary away from the chaos of city life. They found their dream home in Knoxville, Tennessee, where they could nurture their children in a safe environment. By 1995, their son Peter arrived, bringing even more joy to the family. By the end of 1996, they had left their apartment behind and settled into a charming 50-year-old house in the Powell community, planning to renovate an annex for Delphina's mother. Vidar worked as a bellman at the Holiday Inn Cedar Bluff in West Knoxville, while Delphina dedicated her time to homeschooling their children as devout Jehovah's Witnesses. Their faith was the cornerstone of their lives. On the 6th of April in 1997, the Lawlett family attended a religious convention at Freedom Hall in Johnson City, about 100 miles from their home. The day was filled with hope and community spirit, and after the convention they began their journey back home in their reliable 1987 Dodge minivan. As they traveled south on Interstate 81, a sudden pit stop would lead them to a fate they never could have imagined. Around 7:20 p.m. they Stopped at a rest area, a seemingly innocent pause in their journey. 2-year-old Peter, restless and suffering from an earache, needed some attention, so Var decided to take him for a walk. Meanwhile, Delphina and Tabitha headed to the restrooms. On the way there, Delphina had a quick chat with a friend, Karen Sinclair, and her teenage daughter, who were also returning from the same convention as Vidar and Peter waited by the visitor center. 2 young girls emerged in. Vidar, ever friendly, smiled and asked them if they believed in God too. His surprise, they replied that they did not. Just then 2 young men joined the scene when Vidar offered to share more about his faith. One of the men responded with interest. This encounter marked the beginning of a chilling turn of events. The 2 young men, 20-year-old Joseph Risner and 14-year-old Jason Bryant, had an unsettling agenda. Alongside them were 2 young women, 18-year-old Natasha Cornett and 17-year-old Karen Howell. As Vidar began to explain the basics of the Jehovah's Witness faith, Delphina and Tabitha soon joined them, but out of nowhere Joseph returned from his car where 2 other friends, 19-year-old Edward Mullins and 18-year-old Crystal Sturgill, were waiting. In a shocking twist, he pulled out a 9mm gun and declared, "I'm sorry about this, everybody, just be quiet and nothing's going to happen to you. All we need is the van." Now, if you're wondering why these troubled teens needed a car when Joseph already had his own vehicle, well, it's all because of desperation. Joseph's blue Chevrolet Citation was barely running and wouldn't last much longer. He had just received a speeding ticket, adding to his anxiety about getting caught. On top of that, they were in a tight spot financially. Joseph and his friends had stolen 2 guns and some cash before leaving their hometown of Betsy Lane in Kentucky. Desperation hung in the air. They needed a reliable getaway vehicle, and they were running out of time before their families or the police could catch up with them. So with the gun in hand, Joseph ordered the family to return to their minivan. Var, hoping to defuse the situation, offered to give the group his wallet and keys, but they refused. The Lilly family was forced into the van alongside Joseph, Natasha, Karen, and Jason. Var was made to drive, and as they pulled out of the rest area, Edward and Crystal followed them in Joseph's car. Now these young individuals were far from innocent. Each member of this troubled group carried a heavy burden of a dark past. Broken homes, academic failures, and experiences of emotional and sexual abuse marked their lives. Substance abuse, including drugs and alcohol, was a common thread that connected their stories. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. In fact, just 2 days before their encounter with the Lilly family, they had stayed at the Cali Motel on US 23 in Pikeville, Kentucky. It was there that they took part in disturbing activities, even going so far as to burn 666 into the carpet as part of their twisted games. Engaging in seances and satanic rituals, they showcased just how deeply they had descended into darkness. It was believed that the sinister plans of this troubled group began to take shape after their stay at the motel. Following that unsettling time, they returned to Natasha's trailer, where they shared chilling news with her mother, Madonna Wallen. They announced their intention to start Armageddon with Karen, ominously declaring that the end of time was coming on Sunday, April 6th of that year. On that fateful day, the group took a dangerous step further. They devised a plan that would lead them to the home of a local police officer. Jason created a disturbance outside, drawing the officer's attention, while the others snuck inside in their reckless pursuit. They managed to seize 2 guns, 2 boxes of ammunition, and around $500. Now, Natasha in particular was just as troubled as the others in the group. Desperate to escape the harsh reality of her life, she claimed to have been in contact with angels and demons since she was only 4 years old. This early exposure to such dark and mystical ideas fueled her growing fascination with witchcraft. Over time, her obsession became so intense that she began referring to herself as Satan's daughter. This unsettling identity was accompanied By violent tendencies she even threatened her own mother with a knife, a stark indication of how deeply disturbed she had become. However, she would also share in court how her mother had physically abused her at such a young age, but her friends were all too familiar with Natasha's obsession with violence. She often talked about her desire to live out the chaotic storyline of her favorite movie, Natural Born Killers. This film, infamous for its exploration of madness and bloodshed, struck a chord with her, serving as both inspiration and justification for her darker impulses. Moreover, Natasha's reckless lifestyle mirrored the intensity of her beliefs. From a young age she had been drinking alcohol and experimenting with a range of illegal drugs, including heroin, ecstasy, and cocaine. Apart from that fact, Natasha was extremely close to Karen, who also grew up in a violent household. Karen claimed that she was allegedly sexually assaulted between the ages of 5 and 10 by both her uncle and cousin, but just like Natasha, she also had a fascination with the occult and witchcraft, and she regularly used illegal substances. Did you first begin with the Ouija board? Yes. And after the Ouija board you got into automatic writing? Yes. Now so His Honor can understand automatic writing is when you call upon spirits to enter you. Know spirits do enter you in automatic writing, don't they? Yes, but you don't have to call upon them to get them to come into you. Now, interestingly, Joseph, the oldest member of the group, had always been known as a good student. However, everything changed after his mother and stepfather divorced. The split deeply affected him, pushing him into a world of drinking and drug use. Initially he had been dating Natasha, but as things shifted he found himself in a relationship with Karen. Meanwhile, Natasha was involved with another group member, Edward. Edward seemed to have the most stable life among them. He was focused on earning his general educational diploma and worked at a grocery store, showcasing a sense of responsibility that others in the group lacked. But once he started dating Natasha, everything began to change. Additionally, Jason, the youngest of the group, was already on probation. Despite his young age, he had a troubling history of drug and alcohol abuse. With an IQ of around 85, his emotional and social skills were significantly underdeveloped, making it hard for him to connect with others. In a bizarre attempt to prove his toughness and earn respect from the group, he even allowed Natasha to carve her initials into his arm. Crystal, a relatively new member of the group, had her own struggles. While she did well in school, she faced emotional neglect at home. In December 1996, everything took a darker turn when she accused her stepfather of sexual abuse. This brave move led to her being thrown out of her house, leaving her homeless for the next few months. She bounced around, staying with various people, including Natasha, who took her in during this tumultuous time. At this point, it's pretty clear that these young teens were really lost and had been through a lot of tough stuff, but that doesn't make their actions any better. They still murdered others. Going back to the night of the attack when the teens abducted the family, Delphina did her best to keep her kids calm by singing, but her sweet attempts were met with frustration when Jason snapped at her to shut up. But in the middle of all this chaos, young Tabitha, with her innocent heart, tried to lighten the mood by offering Karen one of her chocolates, and just before 9 p.m. that night, 2 calls buzzed into 911. Reporting gunshots on Payne Hollow Lane in Greenville. One neighbor claimed they heard the shots and noticed 2 cars pull up, but only one drove away. The second caller, a contractor working on a nearby water tower, reported hearing 2 quick bursts of gunfire followed by a chaotic noise that reminded him of kids playing on a playground. Deputy Jeff Morgan and his supervisor rolled in around 9:00 p.m. They first spotted the headlights of a blue Chevrolet Citation. Oddly angled on the road, it looked abandoned, stuck on a stump in the muddy ground. The car was empty and its license plate was missing, but what they discovered next to the car would haunt them forever. In a ditch nearby, they found 4 bodies, a man and a woman with a young boy and girl resting on top of them. 6-year-old Tabitha was draped over her father Var, while 2-year-old Peter was lying on his mother Delphina. Tragically, all 4 had been shot, and Vidar and Delphina's legs were crushed, marked by tire tracks as the police dug deeper into the investigation. Little Tabitha made a slight movement, prompting officers to rush her to the hospital. Doctors at the University of Tennessee Medical Center in Knoxville worked tirelessly throughout the night to save her, but sadly she was pronounced dead the following day. Meanwhile, Peter lay across his mother's body, his face buried in the mud. When Deputy Jeff Morgan turned him over, Peter let out a heartbreaking cry. The deputy quickly sat down and held him close until the ambulance arrived. Peter was also rushed to the hospital. Fortunately, he survived, but not without significant injuries. He suffered severe spinal damage and lost an eye. Doctors feared he could have suffocated if he had been left in the mud any longer. During the autopsy, they determined that the family had been lined up along the ditch and shot one after another. It's believed that Vidar was killed first. He was shot in the right eye, an injury that would have knocked him out instantly. While lying in the ditch, he was shot 4 more times. Delphina was initially shot in her left arm and then in her left leg. Neither wound was fatal, however she was shot 6 more times, and it's believed she was still alive during the horrifying attacks on her children. And when she was run over by the minivan, Tabitha suffered a single gunshot wound to the head, while Peter was shot twice. The first bullet entered behind his right ear and exited through his right eye, and the second bullet struck him in the back as he tried to escape. The Chevrolet Citation had gotten wedged on a tree stump, so the 6 attackers jumped into a minivan, driving over Var and Delphina as they sped away, even though the license plates from the Citation were removed. Authorities were able to trace the owner through the vehicle identification number. It led them to Joseph's mother, Mary. She informed the police that she hadn't seen her son in 2 days and didn't know where he was. However, she did know who he was with and provided the police with the names of the other 5 members of the group, all of whom were also missing. The police now had a clear idea of who they were searching for and the vehicle they were traveling in. As the group made their way through Georgia, they decided to stop at a Waffle House for a bite to eat. However, they didn't stay long. When a group of police officers entered the restaurant, the group quickly left, clearly on edge. They had originally planned to head to New Orleans, but instead they changed their route and aimed for Mexico. Upon reaching the border, they encountered trouble. They were denied entry because they didn't have the right identification. After some effort, they managed to find a way into the country. However, things took a turn when Jason Bryant was shot in the hand and leg. During their time in Mexico, the group was eventually stopped by Mexican police, who, upon hearing their claims of being lost, ordered them out of the van for a search. During this search, officers discovered a knife and a photo album that belonged to the Lillard family. After being ordered to return to the United States, they crossed back over the border, where American Border Patrol officers conducted another search. It was here that they were arrested and taken to a jail in Arizona. Shockingly, just 2 days after the murders, several of the suspects still had personal items belonging to the Lillard family in their possession. Natasha had a piece of Vidar's belt and a picture of Tabitha tucked away in her purse. Karen was found with a Hello Kitty diary lock that belonged to Tabitha, and Crystal had the key ring from the Lillard family home. None of these items were of any real value, suggesting they were trophies from their gruesome crimes. At that time, the district attorney sought media attention to extradite the group back to Tennessee to face trial, making it clear that he would pursue the death penalty for the 4 adults involved. The juveniles, Karen and Jason, were looking at potential life sentences without the possibility of parole. The outrage over the senseless and random killings was palpable in Knox County. One convenience store owner hung 6 nuis on a scaffold in front of his business, stating that while he was against lynching, he supported capital punishment. A crowd gathered chanting, Burn in hell. As the 4 adults were escorted by deputies back to Greene County Criminal Court, the judge denied repeated defense requests to try the 6 defendants separately, but ruled that finding a fair jury in Greene County would be impossible. Instead, a jury would be brought in from Bradley County, about 150 miles away. The trial date was set for March 1998, however it never took place. In February of that year, all 6 defendants pleaded guilty to charges of murder and attempted murder as part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. I don't think I have any choice in the case as far as you're concerned, Miss Cornett, but to sentence you in each of counts 18, 19, and 20 to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. The actual truth of who fired the fatal shots and what role each person played remained unclear. Each of the 6 defendants tells a different story about what happened when they arrived at Payne Hollow Lane, and those close to the case struggle to fully believe any one version of events. Natasha, Karen, and Joseph all maintain that it was 14-year-old Jason who was the sole shooter. They claimed that once they exited the van, there was an argument over what to do with the family, at which point Jason started shooting. However, many people believe that the idea of a single shooter doesn't align with the forensic evidence. Some think there were at least 2 shooters using 2 different guns. Jason insists that the other 3 made up their stories when they realized he wouldn't be facing the death penalty and might get a lighter sentence due to his age. He claims that it was Joseph and Edward who fired the weapons that night. Most accounts agree that Crystal, who has always insisted she did not hurt anyone, did not leave the car during the shootings. Regardless of their differing stories, all 6 were handed the same sentence, 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional consecutive 25-year sentence for Peter's attempted murder. Appeals were filed for Karen Howell and Jason Bryant due to a later U.S. Supreme Court decision that restricts the imposition of life sentences on juveniles. However, these appeals have been denied, and all 6 defendants still remain in prison in Tennessee. As for 2-year-old Peter, who fortunately survived the attack, his life took a significant turn following the tragic events. After his medical condition stabilized at the end of April 1997, a custody battle ensued between his maternal grandmother Lydia Salia, residing in Miami, Florida, and his paternal aunt Randy Heyer, living in Sweden. The deciding factor in the case was Heyer's commitment to raising Peter in the faith and teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses. On July 1, 1997, local judge Fred McDonald awarded custody to Heyer. Peter was raised in the Stockholm area by Heyer and her family. By 2007, when he was about 12 years old, he was still experiencing difficulty walking due to the injuries sustained during the attack. However, by 2017, Peter had completed his IT education and was actively seeking employment. In 2019, he made the decision to move back to the United States to pursue a career in technology. He married in 2020, and he and his wife Caitlin now reside in Connecticut. In a related note, on August 24, 2001, one of the defendants, Cornett and death row inmate Krista Pike, were allegedly involved in an attack on a fellow prisoner, Patricia Jones. They nearly strangled Jones to death using a shoelace after Pike and Jones were placed in a holding cell with Cornett during a fire alarm. Although the Department of Corrections suspected Cornett's involvement, investigators found insufficient evidence to charge her with aiding Pike, who was subsequently convicted of attempted murder. The district attorney at the time claimed in several interviews that the 6 youths had planned a killing spree inspired by the popular film Natural Born Killers. However, this theory is highly disputed, given that the violent acts began and ended with the Lillard family at Payne Hollow Road. The district attorney also stated that the bodies were arranged in the shape of a cross, a claim that Sheriff David Davenport, who investigated the scene, refuted. According to Davenport, The teens were simply trying to escape the situation and did not attempt to arrange the bodies in any particular way. But honestly, one can only hope those teens face some serious consequences for what they did. The community hasn't forgotten this case. It still resonates deeply with many. Fast forward 25 years. And a small gathering took place to remember the Lillard family at the exact same spot where they were last found. One of the gatherers present during that time, Vadell along with his partner Jeff Morgan, were the first Greene County Sheriff's Department patrolmen on the scene on April 6, 1997. They thought they were responding to a disturbance call involving drunks shooting guns on Payne Hollow, but what they found has haunted them ever since. And it's true, the Little family did no harm to anyone and lived as normal people who simply wanted to share their faith, yet they were met with a gruesome murder. Fortunately, Peter has no memory of that horrific night and what the 6th did to him and his family. Even a journalist once said, April 6th never fails to remind me of the horrific tragedy that befell the Lillard family, all because of a chance stop at an interstate rest stop. In my almost 8 years as a print journalist, this is the story that moved me to tears. Story 5, almost like it's surreal, like it's something you'd see on TV, and that it couldn't be someone in our company, someone that we knew. She was very, very professional, bright, shining smile, very energetic. They say once a cheater, always a cheater, but what about a killer? Can someone who's taken a life do it again? Sadly, in this case, the answer is yes. Gregory Greene, a man from Michigan, murdered his wife and unborn child in 1991 in a brutal attack. He stabbed her in the face and chest, then calmly dialed 911 to confess. After serving nearly 16 years, he walked free, and with the help of his loved ones, including a pastor who would later regret fighting for his release because Greene ended up marrying the pastor's daughter. But what came next was even more devastating. Greene would go on to assault his new wife and murder his 2 children from a previous relationship, as well as their 2 daughters together. How could a man responsible for such horror be given a second chance only to destroy more lives? What went wrong? This is a case you won't forget, and it often flies under the radar. It's not widely known, and we're not romanticizing it here. We just want to raise awareness about the red flags that everyone should be on the lookout for. So let's dive in and uncover the true story. Now, to start with, let's get to know the man himself. While there isn't a ton of information about Gregory Greene's early life, we do know he was born in 1966. He came from what appeared to be a loving family with a caring mother and a devoted father. He even had a sister, and it seems the whole family was actively involved in their church community. Unfortunately, details about his childhood remain a mystery. There's little information about whether he faced bullying or struggled with any substance abuse. It's a frustrating gap in the story, especially since understanding his background could shed light on his later actions. And as we move forward, we find Gregory in his late 20s when he crossed paths with Tanya, who would eventually become his wife. Tanya Greene, she already had 2 kids from a previous relationship, and soon she discovered she was pregnant with Gregory's child in 1990. Unfortunately, not much is known about the dynamics of their relationship, whether it was filled with love or overshadowed by tension. However, things took a dark turn in July 1991. Tanya had confided in her best friend, someone she had known since middle school, expressing her concerns about Gregory. She revealed that he had been acting strangely and seemed to be involved with substances. Tanya made it clear that she was planning to leave him, saying, "He's getting violent and irritable. I need to get out of here." And she had a plan: attend church that Sunday morning, pack a bag afterwards, and finally break free from the troubled relationship. But tragically, that day never came. At 1:30 a.m. on that fateful Sunday, Gregory picked up the phone and dialed 911. "I just killed my pregnant wife," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I stabbed her and she's dead. She's lying in the kitchen. While the dispatcher fired off questions, Gregory chose to sit on the porch and wait for the police to arrive. When the officers got there, they wasted no time in arresting him. Inside the house, they stumbled upon a horrific scene. Tanya's lifeless body sprawled on the kitchen floor. She had been brutally stabbed 10 times with a steak knife in the face and chest, and tragically her unborn child was lost as well. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Now, according to public records and reports, Tanya had 2 children, but only one was home during the horrific incident. The other child managed to hide in the closet, likely listening in terror as their mother's life was being taken. After the brutal act, Gregory was arrested and brought to trial, facing charges of second-degree murder. During the proceedings, he began telling his public defender that he was mentally ill and wanted to plead insanity. However, after a mental evaluation, the court decided against the insanity plea and Gregory was sentenced to 15 to 20 years in prison, a sentence that many felt was shockingly lenient for taking the lives of his pregnant wife and unborn child. Throughout this ordeal, Gregory's family stood firm behind him. This is where things get a bit murky, because we don't know exactly what Gregory told his family about why he committed such a horrific act. Surely he must have said something to them. Maybe he claimed he blacked out, or that he lost control. However, the specifics remain elusive. What we do know is that despite the gravity of his actions, he received a sentence of only 15 to 20 years. Starting in 2004, Gregory began seeking parole, but he was denied 4 times. The parole board cited his lack of remorse and inability to comprehend the severity of his crime. At one point, he was still placing blame on Tanya, claiming she was partly responsible for what happened. The board ultimately deemed him a danger to society, which is their primary focus when considering someone for release. During all of this, Gregory's family was advocating hard for him. His parents, his pastor, and his sister were all rallying behind him. They began writing letters in support of his parole. In 2006, Gregory's mother sent a letter to the parole board expressing her belief that he was genuinely sorry for what he did and had gained insight into his behaviors during his time in prison. While it's clear that a mother's love is powerful, it raises eyebrows to think it took 15 years for Gregory to have his insight. His sister also reached out to the parole board, stating that over the years Gregory had become closer to the Lord and read the Bible daily. She believed this spiritual growth was helping him through his challenging time. Fred Harris, the pastor we mentioned earlier, was more than just a man of the cloth. He was also a civil rights activist deeply involved in prison ministry. He knew Gregory and his family well, and he felt a strong calling to help Gregory turn his life around. Fred passionately fought for Gregory's release, believing that with support and faith he could become a testament to the power of redemption. He even wrote numerous letters to the judge advocating for Gregory's second chance. According to the pastor, Gregory and him shared a friendship that extended beyond mere acquaintanceship. Before his life spiraled into chaos, Fred wrote to the Michigan Parole Board in August of 2005, highlighting Gregory's connection to their church community. In his heartfelt letter, Fred reflected on Gregory's past struggles, stating he has paid for his unfortunate lack of self-control and the damage he has caused as much as possible, and is sorry. Fred expressed hope that if Gregory were released, he would be welcomed back into the church and that the community would support him as he adjusted to life outside of prison. This support network was essential for Gregory, as it was clear that everyone was rooting for him to get a second chance. During his time in prison, Gregory made the most of his situation. He took various educational courses and engaged in mental health programs, showing a commitment to bettering himself. By 2008, he was ready for his 5th appearance before the parole board, a pivotal moment that would determine his future. As Gregory faced the board. 3 members sat before him armed with letters of support and records of his behavior. During his incarceration it was a tense moment, but all indications pointed to a favorable outcome. The board reviewed Gregory's time in prison and found that he had maintained a clean record since his altercation over the television back in 2002. The staff and correction officers spoke highly of him, noting his respectful demeanor and ability to get along with others. When asked about his plans for re-entry into society, Gregory's parents confidently assured the board that he would return home and that he already had a job lined up, along with a supportive church community eager to help him reintegrate, with 2 of the 3 parole board members voting in favor of his release. The decision was sealed in 2008. Gregory was released from prison, marking the start of a new chapter in his life. At first things seemed to be looking up for Gregory. He secured a job and moved back in with his family. He attended church regularly and appeared to be turning his life around. Shockingly, just 2 years later he completed his parole, an outcome that surprised many given the nature of his past. But life had another twist in store for Gregory. As he was trying to adjust back to life outside of prison, he unexpectedly grew close to Faith Green, the pastor's daughter. Their relationship turned into a sweet love story that almost felt like a fairy tale. A man with a troubled past finding comfort in the arms of a woman from such a different background. It was such a big change for Gregory, and it caught the attention of everyone around them, including Faith. But the thing is, she never really understood why he had been in prison at that time. Whenever she tried to ask him about it, he would change the subject or just stay quiet. This made her uneasy, and she couldn't help but wonder what secrets he was keeping. Now Faith and Gregory had been living together as a blended family since their marriage on December 18, 2010. At first everything seemed perfect. They were a happy family, attending church together and enjoying life with Faith's 2 teenage children, Chad and Cara, and their 2 little girls, Koi and Kay. However, as time went on, Faith began to notice some troubling changes in Gregory. By 2013 he started showing signs of anger and aggression. There was one frightening incident where he kicked the couch while the baby was lying on it, which terrified Faith. He threatened her, saying she better leave or she would regret it. Despite her fear, she felt trapped, especially with her children in the house. Faith tried to seek help by applying for a protective order, but it was denied. She didn't mention Gregory's dark past, which was a huge mistake. Eventually she found herself back with him, thinking things would improve, but the situation only grew more dangerous. Fast forward to August of 2016, and Faith decided to file for divorce again, feeling she had to escape the toxic situation. This divorce really made him angry, and it might have triggered something in him. Just a month later, on September 22nd, everything changed. Gregory lured Faith down to the basement. He zip-tied her hands and feet, then shot her in the foot so she couldn't move. It was a brutal attack. He went even further, slashing her face and body with a box cutter, leaving her in a state of panic and pain. But the horror didn't stop there. Gregory had rigged the family car to fill with exhaust fumes, trapping their 2 youngest daughters, Koi and Kay, inside. They died from carbon monoxide poisoning, a tragic loss that no family should ever endure. In a chilling act, Gregory then took Faith's 2 teenage children down to the basement, where their mother lay helpless. He shot both Chad and Cara execution style right in front of Faith. Can you imagine being a mother and having to witness such unimaginable horror? It's a heartbreaking tragedy. After committing these acts, Gregory called 911, calmly confessing, "Hey, I just killed my family." He sat on the porch and waited for the police. Again, when the cops showed up, they rushed right in and put Gregory in handcuffs. He didn't say much, but what they found was horrifying. The officers described it as one of the most gruesome sights they'd ever encountered. They discovered the body of the 2 little girls in the car, Koi and Kay, who had tragically died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Then they headed down to the basement where they found Chad and Carrera, the two teenagers, brutally killed. Faith was the only one who survived, and they quickly rushed her to the hospital where she spent a long time in intensive care. It's hard to wrap your head around the fact that this man killed his family not once but twice. In court, things took a bizarre turn when it was his turn to speak. He pleaded guilty. According to his public defender, he just wanted to get it over with. The pastor who once advocated for him to get out of prison, the one who married him, ended up facing the shocking reality of losing his 4 grandkids to a man he thought had changed. According to Faith, she had lost her memory of that fateful night, but it was reported that Gregory killed and shot her 2 children right in front of her. The horror of that moment was imprinted on the minds of who heard the chilling details. Meanwhile, their younger sisters, Kay Green and Chloe, met a similar tragic fate. The police reported that the girls were found dead in their beds, victims of asphyxiation caused by carbon monoxide fumes from a car parked outside their home. In a horrific act, their father, Gregory Green, had manipulated the tailpipe of the vehicle, directing the lethal exhaust fumes into the car, ultimately taking the lives of his own children. After committing this unspeakable act, he placed the young girls back in their beds on the ground floor of the house, as if trying to mask the horror he had just inflicted. The car where Kaylee and Chloe were asphyxiated had a hose connected to the exhaust, snaking its way into the vehicle, creating a deadly trap that the unsuspecting children never had a chance to escape. When police arrived, they administered CPR, desperately trying to revive the girls before rushing them to the hospital. Tragically, their efforts were in vain. The children did not survive. Faith showed up at some of the court proceedings in a wheelchair, struggling to move after being shot in the foot. I'm not happy. I'm not satisfied with the outcome. There's no punishment that fits the crime, not even torture, and death would be justice. Your justice will come when you burn in hell for all eternity for murdering 4 innocent children, all because you're insecure as a man, plus the other 2 lives you took. You are a con artist. You are a monster. You are a devil in disguise. You're now forever exposed. It's hard to think that the children were brought into this mess and they were only kids. Chad was just 19 years old and Carl was 17. Meanwhile, his biological daughters Chloe and Kay were only 5 and 4. Chad Allen Sr., the father of the 2 teens, was heartbroken when he heard the news. He couldn't shake the feeling that his ex-wife might have known about Gregory's dark past, especially since he hadn't been aware of it himself. I didn't know any of that, and I'm surprised. I'm so shocked. I'm wondering, does she know about it? You know, how could she not know about it and be involved with someone like that? She had 2 kids. During the funeral held for the 4 children, a pastor tried to comfort Chad, reassuring him that none of this was his fault. Despite that, he was overwhelmed with guilt, feeling as though he should have stepped in sooner to protect his kids. You did nothing wrong. Look at me. You did nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. In a statement from the Waynes County Prosecutor's Office, it was announced that Gregory Green was sentenced to a staggering 45 to 100 years in prison. On top of that, he received an extra 2 years for a felony firearm charge. This meant that he will first serve the 2-year sentence for the firearm offense. After that, he faces a lengthy 45-year term for the other crimes. If he serves his full sentence, he won't be eligible for parole until he is 97 years old. This sentence serves as a reminder that while justice cannot bring back the precious lives he took, it seeks to hold him accountable for his horrific actions. As to the second degree, as to Chad Nay Allen, how do you wish to plead guilty? As to the charge of torture in count 5, sir, how do you wish to plead guilty? As to the charge of assault with intent to do great bodily harm less than the crime of murder? As to Faith Green, sir, how do you wish to plead to that guilty? My understanding is that the defendant is prepared to accept the settlement offer of the people today, whereby he will tender a plea of guilty to the following charges: count 1, murder in the second degree of Kay Green; count 2, murder in the second degree of Chloe Green; count 3, murder In the second degree of Cara Allen, count 4 murder. In the second degree of Chad Allen, count 5 torture. Count 6 assault with intent to do great bodily harm less than murder. Count 5 murder. In the second degree of Kay Green, now 6 years after that tragic night, Faith Green made the courageous decision to share her story by writing a book about her harrowing experience. Her book, titled The Monster That Killed His Family Twice. The Faith Green story was made available on Amazon in 2022. This gripping 118-page book takes readers through the horrific night where Gregory murdered her 4 children. It sheds light on an unimaginable pain Faith endured and offers a glimpse into the chaos of that fateful evening. In addition to her book, Gregory was also featured in the ID channel Docuser's Evil Lives Here, which aired in July of that same year. The episode, titled A Special Place in Hell, can be streamed on Discovery Plus. Interestingly, Faith expresses her hope that by sharing her experiences she can help other women who find themselves trapped in abusive and dangerous relationships. However, not everyone fully supported Faith Green after the tragedy. While victim blaming is never justified, some people online and even in prison harshly criticized her for her choices. Would you say that there were red flags that you ignored, and if so, what were some of those? I can say the red flags were mood swings, the arguments for no reason. Basically, it was like being married but single. He just paid the bills but he didn't want to be interactive, and then it got to the point where it was like he didn't want the older two there. Really, many pointed out that she knew Gregory Green was a convicted killer, yet she still chose to marry him, although she initially claimed she wasn't fully aware of the extent of his crime. That didn't stop the wave of judgment from those who believed she ignored clear warning signs. The harsh reality is that Gregory's violent past should have raised more red flags. He had been convicted of killing his previous wife and their unborn child, an act so horrifying that it should have been a warning of what he was capable of in the eyes of critics. That alone should have been enough for Faith to walk away before the relationship escalated. But relationships, especially those involving manipulative partners, are rarely so simple. Gregory, like many abusers, likely masked his true nature, presenting himself as someone who had changed. Unfortunately, the danger signs were missed and tragedy struck when he took the lives of their 4 children and attempted to kill Faith as well. The lesson people took from this tragic story is that past actions, particularly violent ones, can be an indication of future behavior. If someone has harmed others in the past, it's crucial not to ignore it. For many, Gregory's first murder should have been the undeniable warning, and ignoring it came at an unimaginable cost. This serves as a reminder for those to take any sign of violence seriously, no matter how much someone claims to have changed. Story 6 for Angansuchi. The day of the royal wedding was a day for revenge. He traveled to Northampton armed with a knife and murdered a family of 4. For this man, the best day to kill a family would be the day of the royal wedding. While millions across the United Kingdom were glued to their screens celebrating the union of Prince William and Kate Middleton in a fairy tale ceremony on April 29, 2011, Angansuchi had other plans. He wasn't watching the televised procession, nor was he waving flags or toasting champagne. Dew, however, was boarding a train with a knife in his bag, a passport in his pocket, and murder on his mind. By the time the crowds were cheering in the streets of London, 4 members of the Ding family, Jeff, Helen, 18-year-old Shing, and 12-year-old Alice, were dead inside their Northampton home, stabbed, slaughtered, silenced forever. And this wasn't random. This was a pre-planned revenge which would spark one of the most intense international manhunts the UK had seen in decades. This is the twisted story of the Ding family murders and the man who chose a day of national joy to commit a massacre. It was a quiet spring weekend in the sleepy suburb of Wootton, Northampton. Families gathered in gardens, lawns were mowed Windows left open to let in the breeze, but inside one ordinary-looking house on Pioneer Close silence had settled, and not the peaceful kind. When police finally entered the home on a Sunday evening, what they found shattered the calm of an entire community. A family of four gone, no sign of struggle on the outside, no forced entry, just an eerie stillness in a massacre that had taken place 2 days earlier right under everyone's noses. Who could have done this, and why? As detectives peeled back the layers, they uncovered a trail that stretched across countries, a years-long grudge, and a killer who vanished into thin air. Almost what pushed an educated businessman to commit one of Britain's most chilling family murders. Stay with us because this might get messy inside the modest 2-story house in Wooten. Officers found a scene that would haunt even the most seasoned detectives. Jeff Ding, a respected university lecturer, his wife Helen Chu were there too. Brilliant young daughters Ching and Alice, all four brutally murdered. Their lives were stolen in broad daylight and their bodies left for days. But what was most disturbing wasn't just the sheer violence, it was the precision. Whoever did this knew exactly when to strike. The family had been killed on Friday 2 days earlier between 3 o'clock and 4:00 p.m. time. When most neighbors were still at work, the streets were quiet and no one would hear a thing. So who would want this entire family dead? The answer came quickly, and it pointed to a man with a bitter grudge and nothing left to lose. Gene Xiangtud, who wasn't a stranger. He was a businessman from Coventry, and he knew the Dings well. The two families had been locked in a long, ugly legal battle over a failed business deal, years of court dates, rising legal fees, and bad blood. And when Dee lost that case, something in him snapped. He drove to the Dings' house in broad daylight, and he didn't leave alone. What happened inside those walls in that one terrifying hour would set off an international manhunt. Because after the killings, Dee didn't just disappear, he went on the run. He stole the Dings' rented car and drove to London. From there he slipped onto a coach bound for Paris, then to France, then Spain, then Morocco. He was gone like a ghost, and for over a year the trail ran cold, thousands of miles from England, in a half-built, crumbling apartment block in Tangier. A man was hiding, and eventually someone noticed. Before the headlines, the manhunt, and the bloodshed, there was the Ding family, quiet, dignified, brilliant, a family that had made a peaceful life for themselves in the leafy suburban calm of Wooten, Northampton. They were of Chinese descent, respected by their neighbors, loved by their community, and adored by each other. And Jingdu and his wife came to this country from China in 1998. They were both doctors of traditional Chinese medicine, and they started a family. And after a short while they met the Dings. She was a businesswoman and he was a lecturer at a university in Manchester. At the center was Jeff Ding, a university lecturer with a calm, scholarly air to him and a deep commitment to his work and family. Beside him was his wife Helen Chu, a warm and reserved, the quiet strength in the home. Together they raised 2 daughters who were nothing short of exceptional. Sheng and Alice. Sheng was an academic prodigy. She had already secured a place at the University of Nottingham to study medicine. Her future was bright, carefully planned out with the kind of discipline and brilliance that only comes from raw talent paired with relentless hard work. In the aftermath, exam boards would posthumously award her 4 A stars in chemistry, Latin, mathematics, and biology, grades predicted from her existing work, which showed just how far she was destined to go. She had dreams of healing, of helping, of making the world a better place, but those dreams never left the house on Pioneer Close. And then there was Alice, only 12, a bright budding soul with the kind of quiet intelligence that hints at a future full of promise. Like her sister, she was gifted. Both girls were talented musicians, their home often filled with the soft sound of piano keys and violin strings. Music was their language, one of harmony, beauty, and hope. That same home, part of the redeveloped Simpson Barracks in a peaceful residential neighborhood, had been a place of learning, laughter, and love. Until one spring afternoon it was turned into something else entirely behind the facade of civility, far from the calm of garden streets and school schedules. A storm had been brewing for over a decade, one that began not with violence but with a business deal gone wrong years before the murders. The Dings had partnered with a fellow Chinese immigrant Hong Zhang-du to run a traditional herbal remedy shop in Birmingham, but things soured. Money, misunderstandings, mistrust, and eventually lawsuits. It became a drawn-out, bitter legal battle, a war of paperwork and hearings that dragged on for over 10 years. Du and his wife lost appeal after appeal. By the spring of 2011 the final blow landed: a court order barring Du from disposing of any assets and a looming legal bill of nearly £88,000. Everything he had was slipping through his fingers, and in his mind the Dings were to blame. The day after receiving that court order, Du disappeared, and what came next would tear a hole through the heart of an entire family and shock a nation. On the morning of April 29th, Hong Zhang-du woke with a plan and a knife. At 10:44 a.m. he boarded a train from Coventry to Birmingham. In his bag was his passport, in his pocket a blade, and back at home he left behind a farewell note for his family that read, "Everyone has to say farewell one day." It wasn't a goodbye filled with sorrow, it was a declaration, a quiet, calculated step into something far darker than any of them could have imagined. From Birmingham, Du caught another train heading east to Northampton. It was a journey of less than 2 hours, but it marked the start of something that would spiral into international chaos. By around 1:35 p.m. he was in Wootton, a quiet modern suburb where nothing ever happened. He got off a local bus near Pioneer Clothes, just another face in the neighborhood, just another man walking down a street lined with well-kept homes. No one knew he was carrying a weapon, no one saw what was coming. 2 hours later, at approximately 3:30 p.m., D entered the home of the Ding family. What happened next was as swift as it was savage. D found Jeff and Helen Ding in the kitchen. It's not known if there were words exchanged, if they recognized him in that final moment, or if he struck after catching them off guard. But by the time he was done, Jeff had been stabbed 23 times. Helen was stabbed 13 times. Their lives extinguished in the very heart of their home, a place where they had raised 2 daughters and built a life of quiet success. But D wasn't finished. Upstairs in one of the bedrooms, Xing and Alice were likely unaware of what had just happened downstairs. Maybe they heard something, maybe they didn't have time to react, but what is known is that Du climbed those stairs, entered the room, and unleashed the same calculated violence. Xing was stabbed 11 times, Alice 4 times. The attack was brutal, deliberate, and left no survivors, and yet amid the horror a cry for help managed to escape. At exactly 3:32 p.m. a call was made from Alice Ding's mobile phone to emergency services. On the other end of the line, dispatchers could hear the girl's terrified screams. It was a moment that might have changed everything, but it didn't. The call was mishandled by Northampton police. Officers were sent to the wrong address. When nothing was found, the incident was closed. Back in Pioneer Clothes, 4 lives had already been lost after butchering an entire family, 2 parents and their innocent daughters. And Gong Du didn't flee in a panic. He stayed in a home soaked with blood and silence. He paused, and then, as if the horror he had unleashed meant nothing, he slept for a while. When he woke up refreshed and remorseless, D wasn't done. He took the family's car, a silver Valhalla Corsa, and drove off. He drove for hours, weaving through the late hours of the evening, eventually stopping at the M1's Junction 15, a service station. The time was 9:43 p.m. There he purchased a road map of Northamptonshire. This drive was not meant to escape, but to settle one more score. There was someone else on his list, a friend of the Dings, someone who had dared to support them through their decade-long legal war, someone Duke believed had helped finance his downfall. He was out for more blood, but fate had other plans. No one was home Another loose thread, another plan that didn't unfold the way he wanted, so he drove on straight to London. Back at the Ding family home, a neighbor crept through the house. Nothing could prepare them for what lay beyond the blue velvet curtain in the back room, the one facing the garden. There, concealed like an afterthought, were the lifeless bodies of Jeff and Helen Ding. More than 48 hours had passed since the massacre. They had been murdered on a day of national celebration, and now found on a day that would forever mark the neighborhood with grief. The brutal truth of what had happened inside that home was finally and horrifically uncovered. Back to Duan. His run from the police. When he was in the capital, he slipped past automatic number plate recognition cameras entirely. Somehow the system failed to catch the vehicle as it entered the city. He ditched the Corsa in the affluent neighborhood of St. John's Wood, parked it like it was just another commuter's car. It sat there unnoticed for 11 days, collecting 9 parking tickets while police scrambled to piece together what had happened. Detective Chief Inspector Tom Davies, the lead on the case, would later admit just how difficult it had been to track him down. He was a man with a plan, Davies said grimly. He did not hit any radar. He hadn't just fled. He'd prepared down to the smallest detail. From the moment he stepped out of his home with a knife and his passport, he knew exactly what he was doing. By the time they realized what they were chasing, Dee was already gone. By the time the sun rose on April 30th, Ang was already on the move with blood on his hands and 4 lives behind him. He walked into a coach station and calmly purchased a one-way ticket to Paris. He used his own passport, brazen, unfazed, and seemingly untouched by the violence he had just committed. That same day his wife reported him missing. Meanwhile, back in Northampton, the horror inside the Ding family's home remained undiscovered. On the morning of May 1st at 8:00 am, police officers knocked on the door of 4 Pioneer Clothes. They were looking for An Jiangdu in connection with the missing persons report, but no one answered. The officers didn't force entry. They walked away. Behind that door were 4 lifeless bodies, silent witnesses to a massacre. Later that day, it wasn't law enforcement but a concerned neighbor who stumbled across the carnage as the investigation exploded into a murder inquiry. Dee was already gone. After slipping into Paris, he began a cross-continental sprint to avoid justice, drifting through France, cutting across Spain, and finally arriving in the southern port city of Algeciras. There he boarded a ferry to Tangier, Morocco, a world away from the blood-stained kitchen and the failed 999 call who hoped he could disappear entirely. He made his way to a city nestled near the Algerian border, but the illusion of safety didn't last. Moroccan authorities picked him up as a suspected illegal immigrant. For a moment it seemed like the law might catch up with him, but there was one critical flaw: nobody knew who he was, with no identification and no link to the UK murders. The Moroccan police let him go, and just like that, Anayamta vanished again. He remained a ghost in Morocco for the next 14 months. No one knew where he was until mid-2012, when a tip changed everything. Northamptonshire police had long suspected he was hiding somewhere in Morocco, and as international pressure mounted, they intensified their search. A local newspaper published his photograph, and that photo landed in the right hands. A construction worker recognized Dee. He had been living in the shadows of a crumbling, half-finished apartment block. There was no electricity, no running water, just a slab of concrete, a makeshift bed, and a small gas-powered stove he used to cook scraps. From a once respected businessman to a fugitive hiding in filth, Dee had become a man stripped of everything but the memories of what he'd done. On July 7, 2012, Moroccan police stormed the building and arrested the man believed to be on Shangdu. Back in Europe, the investigation had stretched into Spain as well. Officers from Northamptonshire traveled to Madrid, and though they never fully disclosed the extent of their efforts, they believed their inquiries there played a significant role in Du's arrest. But there was still one major problem. There was no formal extradition treaty between the UK and Morocco. Undeterred, British authorities made a formal application through the Home Office, working behind the scenes to secure his return. On July 10, it was confirmed that man in custody was indeed An Shangdu, the prime suspect in the Ding family murders, and just over a week later the case took another unexpected turn. On July 19, police arrested 4 individuals across England: a 54-year-old woman in Coventry, a 39-year-old in Gloucester, a 22-year-old woman in Southampton, and a 25-year-old man in London. All were suspected of conspiring to assist an offender. Each was released on bail as investigators tried to untangle the web D had left behind. The killer had been caught, but justice was still waiting. After 14 months of vanishing into the shadows of Morocco, and Jangdu's run had come to a definitive end. On February 20, 2013, the British Home Office, working closely with the Moroccan Ministry of Justice, finally secured the extradition of the man whose name had haunted headlines and devastated a community. He was flown back to the UK under tight security, a man who had crossed borders, continents, and moral lines in the most harrowing ways imaginable. The very next day, February 21st, D appeared in front of a magistrate's court in Northampton that charges the brutal murders of Jeff, Helen Shing, and Alice Ding. He stood there expressionless as the charges were read out. The courtroom, packed with press and shadowed by grief, watched the man whose rampage had destroyed a brilliant family be remanded into custody within 24 hours. Du was moved to the Northampton Crown Court. A trial was set for August 5, 2013, a 10-day courtroom reckoning that the Ding family's remaining loved ones and the entire town of Northampton had long awaited, but justice would have to wait a little longer. Procedural setbacks and delays crept in the plea and case management hearing where Du would enter. A formal plea was pushed to May 7, then May 10, and relocated from Northampton to Nottingham. Why? Expert availability. The court wanted to ensure that no detail, no testimony, no forensic nuance was left unexplored, but when Du was finally scheduled to appear in May, a vital piece was missing. A Mandarin interpreter never arrived. Without interpretation there could be no plea. The court was forced to postpone again. A new date was set for July, and the trial itself was rescheduled for November 12, 2013, more than 2 years after the Dings had been slain in their home. On July 18, D once again appeared in court. He said nothing of substance, only confirmed his name tests were still being conducted. Still, the full truth had yet to be laid bare. Hopes that a plea would be entered that day dissolved into silence. Finally, on November 4, 2013, just days before the trial, Aung San Suu Kyi formally denied 4 counts of murder, and so the trial began. The courtroom doors opened and justice took its first deep breath. The prosecution laid out its case with clinical precision. Du, humiliated by a decade-long legal defeat and facing €1,000 legal bill, had left his home on that fateful day with a knife in his passport. Having already penned a farewell note to his family, he had traveled methodically to Northampton, taken a bus to Wootton, and in a span of minutes had extinguished 4 lives in cold blood. The jury listened to all of that in stunned silence. On November 26, the jury was sent out to deliberate the next day. November 27, they returned less than 24 hours later with a verdict that carried the weight of national attention: guilty on all 4 counts of murder. The next day, Du, now 54 years old, stood before the judge for sentencing. The courtroom once again packed. Heard the final judgment ring out: life imprisonment, minimum term 40 years. A powerful message was sent. D would spend the remainder of his life behind bars with no possibility of parole until he was well into his 90s. It was effectively a death sentence behind cold steel bars, but D wasn't done yet. In June 2014, reports emerged he intended to appeal. His legal team challenged the 40-year minimum, calling it excessive, but the Court of Appeal wasn't moved. In fact, it went one step further highlighting that even whole life tariffs harsher than what Dee had received had been upheld in similar cases, such as the notorious Jeremy Bamber, who had slaughtered his entire family. Doo's appeal was firmly rejected. The court stated there was no fault in the trial judge's approach. Justice had not only been done, it had been seen to be done publicly and without compromise. The man who had brought death to a brilliant family fled the world and hid him on concrete ruins had now been stripped of everything, but even behind bars the silence of the Ding family still echoes. 4 lives gone, a future stolen, and a name, Hong Zhang-du, that will forever be tied to one of the most chilling massacres in modern British history. Among those in the courtroom sat members of Helen Ding's family. They had flown in from China carrying not just suitcases but sorrow too heavy for words. They sat through every agonizing detail, the forensic breakdowns, the timeline of terror, the harrowing 999 call that no one should ever have to hear. And as sentencing commenced, the judge paused to acknowledge what the justice system often overlooks: the unbearable emotional toll. I have observed the dignified way in which you have conducted yourselves throughout this trial, he said, his voice steady but reverent. This must have been truly horrendous for you in a way that the rest of us cannot understand. No words could bring back what was taken. No sentence, no number of years could ever restore the lives lost in that quiet Northampton home. But in that moment, in the solemn stillness of a courtroom far from home, grief was finally recognized. And the world, if only for a second, stood witness to the unfathomable strength of a family shattered but not broken as the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper. Thank you for joining me here at MR Night Cared. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.